Are you passionate about public media? Connecticut Public is looking for new members to join our Community Advisory Board. Represent the interest of our viewers, listeners, and readers and help us gather feedback about our programming. Email us your contact information at audiencecare@ctpublic.org and join us in making a difference.
For Connecticut Public Radio, I'm John Henry Smith. He was friendly, he was purple, and he was huge. Not just because he was a dinosaur, I might add. I'm talking about the cultural phenomenon known as Barney. Today, Connecticut Public is proud to debut a 7-part podcast called Generation Barney, hosted by my colleague Sabrina Herrera. I'm delighted to have her with me right now. Sabrina, you could practically hear the smile on your face as you narrated Generation Barney. You clearly love the character. How important was it for you and producers Lily Tyson and Meg Dalton to convey that sense of reverence and love for the character through this podcast?
It was super important. As a kid, as a Latina with not a lot of other Latinas in their school, it meant the world. And what's wild is I didn't even really know it then. But thinking back to it, it exposed me to other types of diversity as well, right? Which had an impact on how I saw the world. And it also helped me feel like I belonged somewhere. And I think that for me, at least, and what I think some millennials and Gen Z folks may not realize is how big of an impact Barney had in the sort of like preschool edutainment space. It really broke ground and targeted really, really young kids, preschoolers. It was different than Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which targeted a wider age range of kids. So it was interesting to really get an opportunity to explore that.
And that's a key point right there that so many adults find out as they get older. Like, you can't really talk to a toddler the way you talk to a 12-year-old, the way you talk to a 20-year-old. There's a talent to it. This podcast answers a lot of the how questions. How did they know how to communicate with kids that young in a way that's really engaged them? How was Barney created? How did they bring the suit to life, for goodness sake? And also, the podcast answers some really interesting where questions. One of those wheres leads right back here to Connecticut and has a lot to do with the very organization that we call home. Give us a little flavor for that, would you?
Yeah, so it actually started in a video store in Prospect, Connecticut. So Larry Rifkin was an executive here at Connecticut Public, and he took his daughter, Leora, to a video store, and they rented Barney. Barney was originally a home video series. It was called Barney and the Backyard Gang. So they rented it, they took it home, and Leora was completely hooked, enamored. She loved it. And so Larry Rifkin called the show's creator, Sheryl Leach, and said, hey, we should pitch this to PBS. PBS was looking for preschool entertainment shows at the time. So basically, they made the call, and the rest was history.
Again, you love the character, but you also dealt in this podcast, Generation Barney, with the fact that there were people who actually hated Barney. I mean, really passionately hated. Why did you think that was important?
Well, first of all, we do journalism here, right? So it's important to represent more than one side to a story. But also, as we researched, we realized that what we love and hate and how we act and react to those things, they tell us a lot about who we are and who we are as a society.
As I've established, Barney didn't speak to me when it was around the way it spoke to you and your generation, and yet I loved this podcast. It was a real page turner if there had been actual pages to turn. So why do you think it is that everybody, Barney fan and non-Barney fan alike, they're going to love this podcast?
I think when it comes down to it, everybody has a Barney, whether it was Barney or not, right? It could have been a different show, a different piece of media, a toy, or a character. All of these, everyone had something that they cherished and that they loved and they didn't want to let go of, right? Physically, right? And so for us, this podcast is about Barney, but it's also about how these things play into who we become as adults. And that's what I think is really special about it.
Well, I've been talking with Sabrina Herrera, by day editor of the Latino Initiative here at Connecticut Public, by night erstwhile podcast host. She's got a new podcast she's hosting called Generation Barney. Find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or most other places you get your podcast. It is available right now as we speak. Sabrina Herrera, thanks so much.
Thanks, John.